hi everybody, thank you so much for coming. We're going to kick things off with the trailer for the new book. Hi everybody, how exciting, what a way to start the evening, a welcome. I'm so glad you can join us tonight for the launch of Exodus of Spies and to celebrate with our author Brian Landers on publishing the Dylan series. I'm Heather from RedDoor, proud publisher of Brian and his 4 brilliant novels, Awakening of Spies, Family of Spies, Coincidence of Spies, and now Exodus of Spies. I'll be introducing Brian in just a moment, but a little bit of Zoom housekeeping first. You'll see we've muted the sound for now, just to stop the videos bouncing. If you want to just view the speakers only, click on the 3 dots on the right-hand side of your tile and show speaker view. I know Alice has lots of questions lined up, but we'll have time for questions from the floor. So if you do think of anything, please do pop it in the chat and I'll come to it later. The Dylan series follows Thomas Dylan and his wife Julia, a couple juggling careers in British intelligence with marriage and family. From the blazing sun of 1970s Rio de Janeiro to snow-covered Polish lakes, from a mafia massacre in Sicily to war in Angola, the Dylans face danger, intrigue, and betrayal. So if you like spooks, Line of Duty, you'll love these books, full of authentic detail, insider acronyms, and twists at every turn. Now, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, given that today is publication day, congratulations. But first, I'll get you briefly up to speed with book 4. In Exodus of Spies, Thomas Dylan finds himself on the front line in the Angolan Civil War. Ministers in London want MI6 to support those fighting to preserve apartheid, but to do it discreetly. Julia now works for a security consultancy set up by a man who has retired from the secret world. He is obsessed only with stamp collecting, but when her boss is murdered, it becomes clear that the war in Angola has come much closer to home. For me, the best thing about Brian's novels is the authenticity. Not only are his books superbly researched and cleverly written, but working with Brian has been a dream for us at RedDoor, and we are all extremely proud to be his publisher. I think that's probably enough for me for now, so I shall swiftly hand over to Brian. Welcome, Brian. It's lovely to see you, and huge congratulations, not just on publication of Exodus of Spies, but indeed on the whole series.
Thank you very much. Right, this is a bit different to the book launches I used to go to at Penguin, primarily because there are no free drinks. But I'm hoping everybody's got a drink, because I'd like to start off with a toast. This sounds like real mutual backslapping to RedDoor, because they've been fantastic. The whole team, Heather, Claire, Lizzie, Anna, and the people that I haven't met yet. I know Jen Parker, Carol Anderson, Jason, who does the covers. So can I start first of all, but I'm going to have a toast anyway to RedDoor.
RedDoor.
Now, the format of today is I'm going to say a few words, really a few words, and read a very brief extract. And then Alice Carse is going to ask some questions, and hopefully people will put questions that they want in the chat, and we'll try and answer those. But the few words I wanted to say is that I've always wanted to write. I've got drawers full of half-finished books, fiction and non-fiction, none of which I could get published until Empires Apart was published 9 years ago. That's my non-fiction book on American and Russian history. And I was going to follow that up, but the publisher went bust. And in any case, the idea of writing a book about Trump and Putin was just too depressing for words. So I looked at a book that I'd written, started at university and wrote when I lived in Buenos Aires, called The Griffin Interrogator. And I was really proud of that book. And I looked it out and read it again, and it was absolute rubbish. It was just so disappointing to see how bad it was. So I threw away about 80% of it and rewrote it as Awakening of Spies, which is the first book that came out. Now, I then needed to find a publisher. And one thing I'd learned at Penguin is that most big publishers aren't looking for good books, they're looking for good brands. At Penguin, we relied on our two big brands of Jamie Oliver and Jeremy Clarkson to churn out another bestseller each year and finance all the other stuff that was experimental or speculative. So I knew I had to write some more books before I approached a publisher. So I wrote Families of Spies and pretty well finished Coincidence of Spies. And then Peter Snell, who owned a bookshop in Leatherhead and been a big supporter of mine on Empires Apart, recommended RedDoor. He was a reader there. Readers are the people that go through all the unsolicited manuscripts and throw most of them away, or make constructive comments is what I should say. And he introduced me to RedDoor and Claire Christian, the publisher, who to my amazement took me on without even reading the second and third books. But it did mean that we had 3 books ready when I first got published. So we've had 3 out in the last year. And Exodus of Spies is the first one where I've had the opportunity to see any constructive feedback from my readers. Whether that's made any difference is something you'll have to try to work out. As Heather said, Exodus of Spies is set in the civil war in Angola, which ran from 1975 to 2002. Well, there's a lot of argument about those dates. And it was very strange civil war, really, because it was a civil war that was as much between Cuba and South Africa as it was between the factions in Angola. And in fact, was really largely between Russia and the United States in some ways. It was part of the Cold War. But the book, The Exodus of Spies, as I wrote it, I thought of essentially a murder mystery. It's about the murder of this chap, Adam Joseph, who is ex-British intelligence and is murdered in Antigua in the Caribbean. And it's a book about loyalty and betrayal and obsession. And if I want to get really pretentious, it's about the meaning of life and about stamp collecting. And I hope everybody will want to read it. I hope people will, more importantly, or as importantly, post reviews, because that's what really drives future sales and word of mouth. So anybody can post reviews on Waterstones or Amazon or just the local bookshop, that would be great. So I will read an extract and then get into Q&A. I was going to read the first bit, which is about the death in Antigua, but I'll skip that because it was to find a bit that's really short. And I've chosen just a page and a half, which is about the events in Luanda. The story starts, it concentrates on something called Operation Argon at the beginning. Operation Argon was a real event. It was a commando raid by the South Africans on the oil installations in Angola, in Cabinda. So I'll read my book. So it starts in Luanda, Angola, 21st of May, 1985. Salvador da Silva Pinheiro, head of the Angolan security police, was expecting the raid that the South Africans had named Operation Argon. He cursed only that he'd received the details too late to do more than send a warning to the army commander in Cabinda on the very evening that Captain Venan Dutoy and his men were going ashore. His mood was not improved when he heard that most of the South African raiding party had escaped. "Have you heard the news from Cabinda?" demanded the Russian colonel who barged into Pinheiro's office the next morning. Pinheiro turned. "Please knock before you enter." The Russian merely nodded to acknowledge he had heard the reprimand. He wasn't about to apologize. "The South Africans have attacked the storage tanks in Cabinda," said the Russian. "Tried to attack. They were intercepted. Our forces captured 1 and killed 2. And the rest escaped," the Russian said. "The rest? You think there were more?" "Of course, they will be back inside Zaire by now." Pinheiro said nothing. Why should he tell this arrogant pig that he knew for a fact that the raiding party had indeed been larger, and that some did, unfortunately, seem to have escaped. And if the Russian wanted to believe that they had crossed the frontier from Zaire, let them. There was no point in telling him that he was wrong. The commandos had come by sea all the way from Saldanha Bay in South Africa's Cape Province. The Angolan turned away. The Russians seemed to think that he should gratefully accept the crumbs of information that they were willing to pass him. But he no longer needed to rely on them. Now he had his own man in the enemy camp, and he was not about to share him with anyone. Not with his subordinates, not with the Russians, not even with his party comrades here in Luanda. Only one other person needed to know, and she could be trusted. So that's a very brief extract, but it's supposed to whet your appetite. I hope it does. Now, I realize people don't want to listen to me a lot, so I've asked Alice Carse to ask some questions. There are three sort of reasons for asking Alice. First of all, she's a leading barrister at Devereux, so that's her job, is to ask awkward questions. Secondly, she knows an enormous amount about the Cold War and Russia, and that's the sort of subjects of the background. And perhaps most importantly, because I saw on Facebook last year, she posted a picture of her summer reading, which turned out to be Families of Spies, one of my books, which I thought was wonderful. So I'll pass over to Alice and answer questions. And then after 15, 20 minutes or so, we'll switch to any questions that you put in the chat room, and then play it by there. So we haven't rehearsed this, by the way, partly because we didn't get the book to Alice until too late. And secondly, because she's insisting that it's more authentic if I don't know what's coming. We will see how that works. Okay, Alice, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian. Thanks, everybody. And Brian's right. Yes, I love all things Cold War history. So I'm delighted with all of Brian's books. Now, turning to some questions, there's two things that stand out for me in your novels, Brian. And so one of them is the fact that we have this pair of strong leads, male and female married couple team, and two, that you have amazing locations, but not just as the backdrop. Your stories have history and politics as a crucial part of them. So that leads me to my first question, which is, in Exodus, the action, or at least some of it, takes place in Angola. And why did you choose Angola in particular?
That was unusual, because most of the locations I choose because I know them very well. Angola, I just thought the war down there is just so strange. It's not one that figures in most people's picture of the 20th century. I mean, the Nelson Mandela described a battle at a place called Quito Canavale as the most important battle in Africa since the Second World War. It was the largest tank battle since the Second World War. It was a massive, great thing. And I suspect that most people have absolutely no idea what happened there. Operation Argonne was, which I talked about, was in the headlines here at the time massively, because the guy who led it, Wayne du Toit, I've only just discovered how to pronounce that. I wrote the book thinking he was called Wine du Toit, and then just for this thing, I thought I'd better find out how he actually pronounced his name, and it's Wayne du Toit. He was captured and by the Angolans and was put on television, and it was all around the world. So that was interesting. It meant that it's almost impossible to get there. So I did a lot of research. It was primarily book research. I mean, I've been to South Africa. I've worked in South Africa, so I know the world down there. But the rest, a lot of it came from academic journals about the war, which are all one-sided, one way or the other. But it was interesting to piece them together. And there are two sides to it. So, you know, you can I felt you could put an authentic case for both sides. It wasn't, I better not say black and white, because it was a war between black and white, but the issues were not as straightforward as people at the time thought they were.
And I know you spend often time in locations you write about, or the places that you know very well. So as a writer, how did it compare for you, writing really on the basis of your research compared to actually having been immersed in the place that you're writing about?
It was really much more difficult, I think. I had to do a lot of research. There's not much actually set in Angola. There's a scene set at Jamba, which was there was this weird thing called the Democratic International, which was Oliver North. Anybody who's ever heard of the Iran-Contra thing will have heard of Oliver North, who was Reagan's sort of, I don't know what you call him, he wasn't a spy, he was far too open for that. But they set up this strange meeting in Angola, which was designed for the press, and they brought in the CIA did it, the Afghan Mujahideen, because at that time they were on our side. And they brought in the Nicaraguan Contras and some people from Laos and so on, put them on a stage and got them to proclaim that they were going to fight for democracy and everything else. So there's lots written about that. So finding that sort of location stuff was quite easy.
And just departing for a moment from this novel, thinking about where you write and how you write, I think I'm right in saying that one of your previous novels, a chapter of it was written on a boat trip whilst you were actually on a trip or on holiday. Which one was that?
That was an example of what I was saying earlier. I was on a boat trip on the Volga, and we stopped at a place that I thought was really interesting and looked like a suitable site for a murder. So I wrote a chapter about a murder in Yaroslavl, but I had no idea of what book it would be in. I just sort of wrote it down and got the street names were fascinating. The place itself was fascinating. So I then later on brought it into a later book.
And moving in to talk about your characters a bit, obviously our lead characters are Julia and Thomas, and they're quite a team. I just wondered, why did you set upon using the device of a married couple to move the plot along?
Because I really wanted a strong woman character, and also I wanted to write about the Cold War period, and it's really difficult to get authentic women characters in Cold War plots because there weren't any. You know, you see these films about these wonderful women agents in Vietnam and so on, and the truth is the CIA didn't have a single woman operative in the Vietnam War. MI6 had Daphne Park, who was she was sort of left over from the Second World War as an agent. So obviously there were a lot of agents during the Second World War, women agents, but Daphne Park stayed in MI6 and was actually the station chief in the Belgian Congo and was involved in the assassination of Lumumba and so on. But she was an absolute exception. So I thought the way to bring a woman into it is going to have to be by linking her to a lead male character and then trying to find an authentic way to make her feature in the novels.
Just picking up on something you said a moment ago about female CIA agents, we have a pretty tough character in your novel, a female agent from the US. What was your inspiration for her? How did you develop her character?
That was an awkward character because I don't think she's the chief of base she's the CIA, the head CIA person in Jamba. There wouldn't have been a woman in that role at that time. But there were now the CIA is dominated by women. It's just totally changed. But at that time, there were very few, and I sort of invented a backstory for her in Vietnam, which is fairly spurious. But there's so many strong women that I could model her on. It was just a question of putting her back into that scene and trying to make it authentic. And I'm sure the comments that some of the men make about her were absolutely the sort of things that were being said at the time.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed her character and how she develops through the course of the novel and what we find out about her particular moral sensibilities, which brings me on to one of the things that I felt was brought out particularly in this novel was this moral complexity of spying for your country. And was that something that you deliberately decided to delve into for this novel?
Yes, yes, it was, because it used to be so straightforward. And I didn't want the sort of John le Carré approach of everybody in intelligence is twisted and betraying each other. But it is clear, especially when you look back on the Angolan Civil War, that things have changed. You know, there were genuine beliefs about what was happening then that, with hindsight, weren't true. I mean, at the time, everybody suspected everybody else. You know, I put the words into the South Africans' mouths about the Reds' threat and the Russians taking over Cape Town and all that, but that was really believed at the time. Just as on the other side, we now know, one of the quirky things that we've now discovered is that in the 60s, the Russians really thought the West was going to mount a preemptive strike on them. And Russian diplomats in London went to the Ministry of Defence building every night and counted the number of lights on, because they thought that if there was suddenly a lot of lights on at night, that means that the West were planning, to bomb them, which was farcical. It seems farcical to us now, but both sides believed that sort of stuff. And I wanted to try and get into that, but although that's not essentially what the book's. So the book's an adventure story, really, a murder mystery, but I felt the background was interested me.
And talking of murder mystery, one of the ways you use to carry the plot along and to set the pace is to use a lot of dialogue between all of your characters, and it's very tightly written. I know we've talked between ourselves about Agatha Christie, and that was something that she used. Were you inspired by her writing at all?
Yeah, very much. Very much. I just like that sort of murder mystery stuff. I like the idea of putting clues in all the way through, so that when you reach the end, you can say, well, that's why that happened. Or somebody read a review the other day that was saying that they found a big mistake at the beginning of the book, and then only at the end they realized it wasn't a mistake, it was really supposed to be in there. I thought that was great.
Do you find it difficult to write the dialogue, or is that something that comes easier to you rather than writing descriptive prose to carry?
No, I find the dialogue much easier than descriptive prose. Yeah. I get carried away with dialogue sometimes. When I edit, I chop out a lot of dialogue.
And one thing that I'm desperate to know, having finished the novel, is how do you know so much about stamp collecting?
I'm not a stamp collector. That actually was researched. I was a stamp collector when I was a kid, but I found there were various journals and things, and I just went through and just that. If you research is actually quite easy if you've got a focus. I didn't have to find out about stamp collecting. I had to find out about the stamps of Mozambique in the 19th century, and that's a pretty limited field, and it doesn't take that much research to and then make up something that might have happened, which is what I did.
And are you able to give us any hints about where we may be going in novel 5?
Well, that rather depends on RedDoor and whether they like novel 5, and because I've finished it recently, and it's very rough. It will need a lot of work before it comes out. It certainly doesn't go where it was going to go. It was going to end up in Cadiz, and I've done a lot of research on Cadiz, but of course I can't go there, and I don't want to write about anywhere in Europe I haven't been to. So it's about the theft of Russian missiles from Georgia at the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union, and how they are then traded, or not traded, or well, I'm not going to give it all away, because I'm not sure that the ending that I've given at the moment is actually going to be the ending that happens in the published book, if it is published.
Great, thanks very much. Well, I've seen that there's loads of questions coming into our chat box, so I'm going to pass over now, but I think it's my turn to make a toast now, given that we're celebrating. So I would like to toast to Julia and Thomas and their continued success in the future novels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Julia and Thomas.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Alice and Brian. That was fascinating. And we have got lots of fabulous questions, so let's get started. So Nicola has said the covers are really great. Thank you very much. We take a lot of pride in our covers, and I do think that the series looks really strong and holds really closely together. So thank you very much for that positive feedback. So Peter says, did you know details about the Angolan War before you started writing?
Well, I knew it took place, and that was about it, really. I mean, you know, it was called the Border War in South Africa, and you can't really have worked in South Africa without people talking about the Border War. And I knew that it was a very strange sort of situation. There was this guy, Vanen du Toit, that I talked about, who raided and was put in prison for 2 years. And then he, later on, when apartheid was abolished and Mandela and so on arrived, he then went back with a lot of South African commandos, went back to Angola, fighting for the very government that had kept him in prison for 2 years, and fighting against Savimbi and the people who had been his allies. And it struck me that was a really interesting, just struck me as really strange that the South Africans as commandos had been in there wrecking the country, and then they went back as mercenaries and well, you can't say rescued it, because the Angolan regime is utterly corrupt and pretty despicable. But the idea that you can change your loyalty quite so quickly struck me as something that was worth exploring.
Thinking about, you obviously base your fiction, you know, a lot on history and real events and places that you've visited, and you're obviously inspired by those landscapes and the people you've met. Do you think you could write a fiction novel that wasn't based on some element of fact?
No, I don't think I could. No. I mean, I talked about those fragments of books, which I've been looking through recently, and I mean, you know, so there's a great half a novel on based on a murder mystery, based on an internal auditor for an insurance company, which is really boring subject, but that's what I was for 2 years, right at the beginning of my career. I did write a book, which I got about 3/4 of the way through, called Peter Mandelson's Diary, which was a diatribe. It was a fictionalized, totally fiction, but was drawn from my total disrespect for Mr. Peter Mandelson, and that might have been quite interesting.
You can.
Yeah. No, I never finished it.
Right. So Graham says, "Hello, Brian. Does Che Guevara feature?"
No, not directly. I think I've mentioned him a couple of times in other books. I mean, he in some ways he's quite a hero, you know, for all sorts of reasons. One of which is he was Argentine, and anybody called Che reminds me of my time in Argentina. But no, not directly.
Alan says, "Has lockdown helped or hindered your writing?"
That's a really interesting question. I'm in a sort of, I'm not in a writers group, but the Society of Authors has various subgroups, just chats like this, online chats. We had one not long ago, and I think we were pretty well all saying how uncreative we've been during lockdown. And I certainly have. In book 5, I'd written 20,000 words of that by the end of last January, January of last year, I mean, and it took me 13, 14 months to write the rest of it. No, I found it really, really difficult, partly by not being out anywhere and being inspired, because I do get inspiration from the places. I mean, you know, Families of Spies was a totally different book because I happened to go to Sicily and found a whole lot of stuff there. So no, I think it's been really difficult. I don't know why. It should have been easier. I've had much more free time, but it hasn't been. It's been difficult, I think, for a lot of creative people.
Yeah.
Plus me.
Yeah. Carol says, "Have not read your book yet, but were there difficulties or issues with portraying actual people?"
Well, in the sense you've got to be really careful. There's nothing, I mean, in this one, for example, I've mentioned people like Oliver North and Vanen du Toit, but absolutely factual. I don't put words into their mouth.
Mhm.
You know, I would never write something like The Crown, where you just take real characters and just make up a lot of rubbish about them. I refer to people and try to be as accurate as I can be. Yeah, and I don't think I've said anything particularly nasty about anybody.
No, I don't think so.
No, no.
No.
I mean, Maurice Oldfield, who was head of British intelligence, was gay, and that wasn't known at the time. And I mentioned that, but everybody knows that now because he was caught. And yeah, I don't.
Okay. So the wonderful Peter Snell says, Brian, how did your time at Penguin prepare you for writing spy novels? Is Penguin's management style really that secretive and pretentious? Or is that no comment?
Well, I don't know. There's an element of office politics that was certainly around at Penguin.
I'm sure.
That I have brought into the books, all the books. I think there's a particular office politics in the public sector, which is definitely come in. You know, the time I spent in the Home Office and to some extent at Company Service, but really my time in the Home Office and the Prison Service, that has influenced the way I see bureaucrats working and the importance of grade and scale and, you know, the size of the waste paper bin and all that sort of stuff. So Penguin, no,
maybe Penguin not so much as
no.
maybe.
Penguin, you know, Penguin. I was very proud of the time at Penguin. They you know, the stuff they've done, you know, some of the legal cases they fought and so on, and the sort of shouting down the Holocaust deniers and all that sort of thing. Which was, you know, I was nothing to do with that, but I was really proud of that. They've changed a bit now. I mean, they're censoring books in India because of sensibilities of the current government, which I think is an appalling thing to have done. But
okay. So Joe, I'm sorry, I may have stolen this one on you. Brian, which do you find easier to write, fiction or non-fiction?
I think, well, fiction. I think
fiction based on.
I found non-fiction easy to write when I was really really passionate about the subject rather than just interest. But I'll write about anything. I mean, you know, I'm just doing research, and I use a website called Academia, which I did use a lot for the research on Angola, and I got an email from them the day before yesterday saying, are you the Brian Landers, who's the author of an article on overhead cost management in the retail sector? And I was sort of thought no, and then I thought, oh Christ, yes, I did. I wrote that in 1989. I'd completely forgotten I'd done that. That's how they found it.
They know you better than you know.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yes, I have to admit.
Yes. So Carol says, fascinated with your comment that a place appeared to be a good place for a murder. How do you define a good place for a murder? Like that.
I've no idea. You just feel it. You just, I don't know. I mean, Yaroslavl just struck me. There were big empty streets, and it happened that Andropov, who was at that time the head of the head of the KGB, was born there, and the street was called after him. But you could just picture it, and the same in some of the scenery in Italy. It was
yeah.
You go into the sort of mafia villages. In fact, you know, one of the villages I mentioned, I discovered afterwards. You probably know that the various judges were blown up by the mafia in Sicily, and it turned out that they'd stored all their bomb-making equipment in a churchyard in a little village that we'd gone to, and thought, gosh, this would be a great scene for a mafia setting. And we didn't know that at the time.
Mia says, I like that, read The Mistake. I did too, actually, I have to say. Clive says, hi, Brian and Liz. How much of your excellent writing was shaped and inspired by the locations, fine dining, and relaxation on your holidays in Antigua and elsewhere?
A lot. I mean, you know, it's quite difficult to twist the plots around to go to the places I really want to visit. It's not always like that. I mean, you know, the whole scene in Trieste in Coincidence of Spies, and we went to Trieste precisely because I needed somewhere that was a certain distance away from Gdansk by ship, and I didn't want it to be on the other side of the Atlantic, so I sort of traced it around the world, and a ship would have arrived in Trieste at the time that fitted in with the timeline. So we went to Trieste, and that was fabulous. But it's usually the other way around.
Right.
And the book 5 has got a big section of Madeira because we had to be in Madeira at the time.
You should carry on writing these novels, Brian, because you just keep traveling.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I know. That's the problem with lockdown.
I know. So
Well,
Peter says, how do you get everyday period detail right?
Well, in my case, it's easy. It's memory. I do a lot of checking, especially on technology. And I can never remember, when was the fax invented? When did it disappear? And mobile phones, I thought, were far more recent than they really were.
That's where copy editors come in really handy.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, fantastic copy editors. I mean, that is just, they picked up all sorts of things. And some things, once I proved myself correct. There's a hotel in Zandvoort called the Sonnenwende, which is not a Dutch word. And the copy editor said, looked it up, and that hotel doesn't exist, and it's not a Dutch word. You must have got it wrong. And I went on the internet and I found a reference to a local authority decision in 1980 something, saying the Hotel Sonnenwende was being demolished. I said, look, it was there. It really was there at the time. But I think that's the only time I've caught your copy editors out in 4 books.
They're eagle-eyed experts.
Yeah.
So Joe says, are any of your protagonists based on real people you might know, have met, etc.?
Yes.
And should that go to the grave, or are we allowed to discuss?
Yeah, well, so usually the minor characters. There's a general in Fairmont in which one's he in? Coincidence of Spies, that is definitely based on somebody that I crossed swords with. And some of the good people. The Lord Grimspan character is definitely based on Sir Harold Maguire that I worked for. It's that sort of old-fashioned patrician. Probably doesn't exist anymore, but yes, yes, you take bits of character.
Clive says, Brian, is it getting easier or harder to write each book?
I think it's getting harder because they're moving around in time, and the Cold War is coming to an end, and the Cold War was so easy to write about compared with what came later. Lots of people, you know, you see that in John le Carré. So in that sense, but on the other hand, I know the characters, and you know, as long as I don't kill them off, which I'm not intending to. Well, one of them was killed off in the latest book.
No spoilers. D says, how much do you plan in advance, Brian? Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm a plotter. Although I don't always know exactly where the ending is, I know who's going to be involved in the ending and which are the baddies and which are the goodies. I'm not a plotter. It's really interesting talking to other authors, because it's most authors these days go to creative writing school or something, and there are definite stages. You know, I think there are 7 stages that every novel must go through. You know, I can't remember what they are, but I don't do that. And I know I was meeting somebody who does everything on post-it notes, and enormous detail, and then moves them around to move where the chapters are and the characters and so on and so forth. I'm not that systematic. No, but I plot them out in a fair degree of detail.
Robin says, what inspired you to have Julia write a chapter in Exodus of Spies?
Well, that was purely because that chapter was set in London and Thomas was in Warsaw, and we had to find a way of doing it. But I really enjoyed writing it. And Liz, my wife, then tarted it up and put it in, well, actually made more than tarted it up. She improved it no end. And I thought it went very well. And in fact, in the way the 5th book is going at the moment, there's another chapter like that too. And I toyed with the idea of writing an entire book as Julia, but I don't think I'm capable of doing that.
Okay. Tom says, how many more books would you envisage in the Dylan series? Do you have other series in mind?
I've no idea. I'll just keep writing as long as I can, I suppose. I've got an idea for a 6th book, which has got a title that's not something of spies. But as I've only got a title at the moment, I'm going to have to do a lot of work on that. But
there's also a second part to the question. Have you had any backlash from any governments based on your content in the spy novels?
No, I don't. These days, there's so much has been written about MI6 and MI5 and so on that I don't think anybody would be surprised by anything I've written.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of the stuff about MI5 and MI6 I've found by researching other books. So.
Okay. Penelope says, are we going to have some character development of the leading couple, and in particular, an account of tensions in their marriage? Just curious.
Yeah, there's a bit more tension, and I'm really nervous talking about the 5th book because, hey, Heather, you haven't seen it, and I don't know how it's going to go. But at the moment, yeah, there is more tension there, which I think is natural. But I mean, one of the early reviewers, I've had really good editorial feedback from people like Fiction Feedback and so on. But one of the early ones, where I sent Families of Spies in before I'd spoke to RedDoor, rejected it because there wasn't enough tension, and there's an Italian policeman in it, and they said if you changed it so that the heroine had an affair with an Italian policeman, it might become more interesting and more sellable. And I didn't take them up on that.
Okay. We've got so many questions here, but I'm going to make this the last one for now. From Lucinda. Brian, in your bio at the back of the book, it says Thomas was inspired by your experiences with British intelligence. Is he an amalgam of people you met or autobiographical?
I don't know. I don't think he's autobiographical. I mean, it is fiction. It's entirely fiction. That the intelligence people I used to work with were no longer in intelligence when I worked with them. It's not. But some of those people are definitely in the book. But the main character, I think, is, to some extent, is how I'd like to think I would act myself if I was stronger and braver and more intelligent.
Right. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to hand back over to you now, Brian.
Okay. Well, all I wanted to do now was I asked my friend Peter Wyman to say a few words about it, about the books, partly because before going to RedDoor, I was going to try and self-publish, which was a big mistake. But I did put one up on Amazon, and I got a fabulous review back from Peter, and I thought, this is a man after my own heart. And he was a friend anyway. I don't know what more to say about Peter. He's non-executive of umpteen companies, former colleague, he's a current friend. He's got a who's who entry. I won't say it's a bit longer than mine. It's probably about 10 times longer than mine. So can I just let's just pass over to Peter and see if you wanted to say something, please do.
Thank you, Brian. I think one thing you left out was that I'm also free. I didn't charge for the evening,
Yes.
so I'm sure it was the real reason you asked me. But as you said, Brian, I have a number of non-executive roles. One of the problems with non-executive roles is you have a heck of a lot of reading. You know, I read research papers, policy papers, board papers, goodness knows what else. So both the time for reading for pleasure and the inclination to read for pleasure is really quite limited. And I'm not just saying this because we are friends, as you said, but I really, really enjoyed the first 3 books, and I'm quite sure I'm going to enjoy Exodus of Spies when I get there. And I was trying to think what made them so special. Why did I so much want to read them, other than obviously I know you? And I think it's a number of things that various people have touched on this evening. So first of all, the Dylan series transports me to another place. And I, like you, I love traveling. Unlike you, even out of lockdown, I don't get a lot of time to travel. And obviously the last year, none of us traveled anywhere. So to be transported somewhere with the authenticity that was mentioned earlier, I just think is fantastic. And they also transport me to another time. And it was a time that, you know, we're roughly the same age. So it was a time we both lived through. But it's great because it brings back that period, which was a pretty interesting period of my life and of the history of the world. And I love the historical detail. I mean, I've always been interested in history, and you take us into little bits of history going back centuries, which just fantastic. And as far as I know, it's all not just authentic, but really accurate. So those are sort of some of the reasons. But above all else, it's the page turner. I mean, it's a bit of a silly thing to say, but your plots are so ingenious, and the characters are built up in a way that you really do want to find out what happens next. So you find yourself staying up far too late in the night trying to, you know, get to the end of the next chapter. So I think on all those grounds, the books are great, and I'm so pleased to hear you say you're going to carry on writing for a very long time. So I thought I would just end with a toast, but I realised, Brian, that as you've got older, you've got smarter, because according to the blurb in the back of the book, when you were a student, you used to write to subsidise your bar bills. But now you've gone one stage better, because you've got us all here tonight without having to buy anybody a drink. So you're obviously cleverer as you've got older. But I've got to hear a bottle of Sicilian wine. I couldn't find a bottle of Angolan wine in my cupboard, but I have a bottle of Sicilian wine, and that goes to families of spies. And so I would just like everybody to raise a glass to Bran, and may Bran allow Thomas Dylan to survive many more stories and books and go on as your co-author on at least one chapter. Thank you very much, and God bless you both.
Oh.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. I'm really touched by that. Okay, I think I hand back to Heather now. You're on mute, Heather.
Sorry, I always do that. Would you mind if we did maybe a few more questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
So many. Roger says, I have just finished Awakening of Spies and am in awe of your prolific output since. There is a lot of weapons expertise in that book. I wonder if that was based on personal experience, or if not, how you gained such detailed knowledge.
Well, the answer to that is American gun laws. I mean, there is just so much documentation on weapons in the United States. You can get any detail you want. And I've done a lot of research on that, and particularly on weapons of the period. And yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things that all spy books have to have, I think, is some sort of authenticity in terms of weapons, because a lot of people are looking for that. I'm not in, I don't particularly like the spy books that are all about bombs and guns and boobs and nothing else. But that's, you have to have that right. And I think so far anyway, I think I've got it right. But no doubt somebody will tell me I haven't.
Jenny says, have you any holidays planned which you hope will inspire you for future books?
No, we've got no holidays planned. I'd love to.
What's your wish list? What's your wish list? Where's the next place you're going?
That's an embarrassing question because Liz is here. Her wish list is Mauritius, and I can't think of any way to get Mauritius into a Cold War plot. I would like to visit Graz in Austria and Budapest because I think that's an area that's rich in potential for Cold War type espionage, and that would be fun. And who knows, if RedDoor doesn't like the 5th book, then maybe by the time they made that decision, Cadiz will be back available to go to, and we go to Cadiz and I can go back to my original ending.
Excellent, we've got lots of options. Joe says, other than virtual book launches, how is marketing a book different during a lockdown? Are people generally reading more, less, the same? No idea.
I ought to let you answer that, Heather. I don't know. I'm just finding it really difficult. It's just about word of mouth now. It's finding how to.
Things have changed, and certainly everything seems to have been brought much more online. I have to say, from a personal experience, having young children, I love the fact that there is so much more online because it means that I can attend, whereas before maybe I wouldn't have been able to. And I think that sort of whole accessibility and being able to attend things that you wouldn't have necessarily been able to physically has really sort of opened up. And I think it was a game changer. Everyone had to really bring their A game and change straight away and be prepared to do things differently. And certainly the people in the book industry who have been recognized for that are the ones that changed and adapted and moved online and found different ways of doing things. Being adaptable and versatile, I think. There are still loads of figures coming out. Obviously the big names are always selling. They will always sell. I think the question is, how will the debut authors have fared? And I think the indie presses have certainly found it really hard. And it has been tough. I think it has been tough for everyone. I think the proof will be in the pudding maybe a bit further down the line when more data comes out and we can start analysing it all. But I think the main thing is people have carried on reading. And what we are seeing trend-wise is that people are looking for thrillers, escapism, positivity, things to take them out of their daily life. So that's certainly what I have seen happening in the trade press anyway.
I think also there's a question about social media and how to use that and how relevant it is. And my own feeling is there's a bit of overkill on it. I know I was told by a very successful author the other day that an email list is absolutely essential. And I said, well, I've now got an email list. And he said, but don't overdo it. Don't send out more than 3 emails a week. I said, 3 a week? I send out like 1 every 3 months or something. I can't believe there are people out there waiting to hear some author write to them 3 times a week. He said, oh, yes, absolutely. Jolly good. We shall see. You won't get that from me. But anyone who wants to go on my mailing list that isn't already, please let me know.
Please do add yourself. Clyde says, is it time to go to China?
In terms of, yeah, I mean, there are some great spy thrillers set in China. There have been for a long time, right? Back from the Quiller days. Yeah, I mean, I've been to China for business, and I find it one of the things that I find difficult is imagining my characters in an environment where they don't speak the language at all. You know, I've Thomas is not by coincidence. I've set him up to speak Portuguese and Italian as his two languages, and most of my books, like Angola, you know, Portuguese, and Families of Spies is Italian, and so on. And I've got him to learn Russian because I really needed that. But I think I can't imagine a spy. I mean, very obviously, it's very difficult for a spy to merge in China and not be noticed, and especially if they don't speak the language. So I think I would find that difficult.
Okay. Hugh says, how many hours a week do you spend writing?
That's interesting, because there are two schools of thought amongst authors about this. One is that you should write a certain number every day. I don't do that. I have splurges. I do weeks at a time when I do nothing but write. And like I said, in less than a month in Madeira, I was there as a tourist. I went and did a lot of tourist things, but I produced 20,000 words. And then I'll go for a month and write nothing at all. So it's not. No, I can't give an honest answer to that.
One of those things that's very different from author to author. It varies so much. Peter Snell again. Brian, do you use Word, Scrivener, Papyrus, or a typewriter or paper?
I use Word. I use a word processor, and then when I get stuck, I just write on paper. I've got a little recorder thing that I carry with me all the time. So if I'm out, I'll dictate something into it. And there's various bits of software that's supposed to translate dictated words into written words, and none of them seem to be able to recognize my accent. So I've been a disaster using that. No, I don't use any of there are various author the software for authors that would sort of break up your book into chapters and rearrange them and do all that. I haven't used any of that.
Okay, Susan says, have you got a favourite out of the 4 books?
Yes. And I find talking to other people, most of them have favourites too, and they're all different. So my favourite is Families of Spies, the second one. I really, because I really enjoyed writing that. I just loved Sicily. And but on the other hand, the latest is always the favourite. At the moment, my favourite is obviously Exodus, because I think I expanded as a writer in that, and I think it's an area that people don't know much about, but I don't know.
Catherine says, is it important to read your books in order?
No. Especially if you're here now, you will know that Julia and Thomas are a pair, which isn't obvious in the first book, Awakening of Spies, but other than that, no, it doesn't make any difference. I don't refer back to.
Okay, and I am going to round off with the last question, because I always ask this. In a TV adaptation, who would play Thomas Dillon?
Oh, God. Who's the guy that plays Jason Bourne? I like him.
Matt Damon.
Matt Damon.
Right,
yeah.
There we go, Matt Damon.
If he could do an English accent.
I'm not sure.
Probably not.
No, I can see Matt Damon as Thomas. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. So thank you all so much for attending tonight. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Peter. I've had a wonderful time. I hope you have too. Huge thank you for joining us and spending your time with us tonight. If you haven't already, please do get your hands on a copy of Exodus of Spies, and indeed any or all of the Dillon series, either from the RedDoor website or from all good bookshops. A final toast, I think. Cheers, Brian. Congratulations on creating such a wonderful series, and a huge congratulations on your publication day today. Cheers.
Cheers, Brian.
Thank you.
And thank you all for attending, and take care, everyone. Stay safe and good night.